Welcome to Biblically Speaking. My name is Cassian Bellino, and I'm your host. In this podcast, we talk about the Bible in simple terms with experts, PhDs, and scholarly theologians to make understanding God easier. These conversations have transformed my relationship with Christ and understanding of religion. Now, I'm sharing these recorded conversations with you. On this podcast, we talk about the facts, the history, and the translations to make the Bible make sense, so we can get to know God, our Creator, better. Hello. My name is Cassian Bellino, and I'm your host for Biblically Speaking. Today, I am honored to have Dr. Robert Carter join me today for the podcast. You are a geneticist, a marine biologist, and a researcher with Creation Ministries International. I found you through Is Genesis History, that documentary on Amazon, which really I watched at the beginning of me starting this entire endeavor to pursue the Bible through scholars. So this is extremely exciting for me to have you on the show. But just a little bit about your work is you work with human genetics, biblical genealogy, and historical models that support a young Earth perspective, which we will discuss in a second. But one of the main things I wanted to bring you on the show, Dr. Carter, is to discuss how does the biblical timeline align, intersect, contradict the scientific global timeline that we know today and we're raised with in school? And how can we reconcile both of these as Christians and align those? Welcome to the show. I am so privileged to have you here with me today.
Thank you. And I want to start off by saying something. Cassian, I really appreciate your approach to all this. Listening to some of your episodes, which I've done getting ready for this, just your wonder at this new exploration and finding things out for the first time, it brings me back, several decades. But, oh yeah, I remember when I learned that and how amazing that was. And after a while, you just tend to forget. So this is very refreshing hearing you talk about these things. And I'm excited to share some of this with maybe some people who have not heard some of the things that we're going to discuss.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, sometimes it's shocking to be on air live and have someone drop a bomb on you. And you're like, I need a minute. And you got to edit out those silences. But this is exciting. I mean, it's really difficult to hear that the earth is billions of years old. And then to go to church on Sunday and hear 7 days. And then there were humans from the get-go. I mean, it's really hard. But before we get into those details, we've got a great conversation ahead of us, but how did you get into this? How did you get into genetics of all the things and biblical history?
Well, it's funny because I had a hard time choosing where to go in college. I was choosing between biology or history, two of my favorite subjects. I ended up at an engineering school, which is strange, studying biology, and then many years later, like 10 years later, I'm in graduate school studying corals because I like marine biology. I like corals. I like scuba diving. And I ended up in the genetics lab cloning genes out of corals and engineering them into fish, making transgenic organisms. Well, what I realized in the middle of all that is like, wait a minute. A lot of the tools we're developing for modern genetics are historical tools. We're able to use them to test theories of history. I said, so I got to recombine my two favorite things, which is genetics, biology, and history. And since graduate school, I've been doing a lot of studies on Human Genome Project, Neanderthals, races and racism. Can we fit all the people in the world into Adam and Eve? What about Noah's flood? Very, very historical questions using DNA to try to get at the question.
And when you say tools, are you talking about carbon dating?
No, I'm talking about basically programs.
Oh, what do you mean?
Like I can write a Python script that can pour through the ACs, Gs, and Ts in the Human Genome Project and look at the frequency of some letter in Africa versus Europe.
Oh, to show just I want to say the diversification of genes. I'm like, the word is slipping my mind right now, but just kind of like how those mutate, the mutations, that's the word?
Yes, all sorts of different things. There's so much information out there now and so little time. I mean, I can write a program because I'm not a computer programmer. I just kind of make things up as I go along, and ChatGPT helps me a lot. I can write a program that'll do something, and 3 days later it might be finished.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the level of the information, how much data is out there. But even, I mean, the Thousand Genomes Project is finished. There's now tens of thousands, if not close to a million, human genomes available to research from people all around the world.
That's interesting. So, and I appreciate the marine biology. I studied sustainability. I took plastic out of the ocean. We're on the same page there. And I love to free dive. So, like, we are the same. I'm just
I love
aligning
free
myself.
diving too.
Yeah, it's so fun. But how did you get the Bible in there? Like, how did you, in such a secular field, start being like, let's start talking about Noah? Like, didn't your coworkers look at you like you were crazy?
They didn't know. No, nobody
Oh.
ever asked me. I said,
Mm.
when I'm going to graduate school, honestly, on my way to graduate school, my Christianity was on the fringe. I
Mm.
was really struggling.
Mm.
I uh, I had just started getting introduced to the liberal, if you would, school of theology, and
Mm.
I didn't know any of these answers. And people that I was actually teaching at a supposedly Christian school,
Oh,
and the teachers were tearing me apart,
what do you mean?
just one little thing at a time, and had enough self doubt and lack of understanding that I didn't know how to answer these questions, and I was falling apart on the inside. And I left teaching and I went to graduate school, and I knew that mathematically evolution wasn't going to work, and
Mm.
I knew that evil existed in the world, and that was about it. I mean, I wasn't certain about the resurrection. I wasn't certain about the virgin birth of Christ. Basic Christianity stuff that makes you a Christian or not. I was really struggling, but
Yeah.
I was still, after this point in time, after 10 years of thinking, I wasn't an evolutionist anymore.
Mm.
So I'm in graduate school, and after about a month, I said, "Wait a minute, that's all they got?" I thought it was going to be like this brand new level of information. No, it was all the same old stuff that I'd already been seeing. So the evolution part wasn't a giant question. I was struggling with the age of the earth. After a year or two, I looked down. I said, "Rob, it's not hundreds of thousands of years old. It's not millions of years old. The earth is either thousands of years old or billions of years old. There's no middle ground. Pick a side."
Oh.
And that was hard. So I said, "All right, I know what the Bible says. I'm going to believe the Bible." And it's the same time I was reading books like Evidence That Demands a Verdict and The Case for Christ, and good, and actually the guys who wrote those two books aren't young earth creationists. However, they helped me process all the questions and build a groundwork of understanding. And from that point, that's where I ended up where I am today.
And just for the people that do not even know that there is a debate for the young earth or the old earth, which they probably do once you explain it, do you mind just giving us like a high level difference explanation there?
Sure. There's two ways to approach our version of history, what we think about history. One is the predominant strain in academia today. It's called naturalism. It's an idea that comes out of the Enlightenment in the 1700s when the philosophers started getting involved. They took the laws of science that the Christians had discovered 100 years before. They got rid of the God, kept the laws, and gave us a philosophy. Now, it's a belief, right? It's not something you can prove, called naturalism. That's the belief that nature's all there is, that you can use the natural force.
No. Okay, wait, catch me up. We had a bit of a hiccup. I cut you off. Naturalism.
Naturalism is a philosophy, a belief that natural processes and forces can be used to explain everything that's ever happened in the history of the universe. That's where we get the Big Bang Theory. That's where we get the naturalistic origin of life theories. That's where we get evolution. Notice there's no miracles. There's no outside forces. There's no God. Whether or not God exists is irrelevant. Maybe God started the Big Bang or something. But it cuts out any biblical approach to understanding history.
Like the source of anything happening was just a natural occurrence
Yeah.
rather than an intentional design.
Yes. So that
Okay.
is the philosophy. So when they say, if you say, "I believe the Bible," "Oh, you're not a scientist." Oh, wait a minute. I'm not a naturalist. It doesn't mean, I don't understand evolution. I just don't agree with your assumption that everything that's ever happened ever can be explained by natural forces. And if there's a God, naturalism's not true. And God can
So there's no intersect. There's no way to say God intentionally created a complex design that is now happening naturally. Like it
no,
cancels out the other.
but that's the cool thing. if God is a God of order and a God of law and a God of complexity, well, he doesn't ever do anything against his own nature. So if that kind of a God created the universe, it would operate according to law. It would
Oh,
behave naturalistically once
okay.
it's created.
Okay.
So naturalism had a good run of it for about 200 years. And now in the modern time, we have biological complexity, which we didn't understand 100 years ago. And
Oh,
the more complex life is, the less probable it is that naturalism can explain it.
wow. Wow, that is a really good apologetics. That's some good stuff right there. But how does that interact with old Earth versus young Earth?
Well, within Christianity, there's a great divide between people who, wondering how old the Earth is. And it's funny because Darwin got more support from the clergy than he did from scientists when he published his book. There was a huge support from within the so-called church in the 1800s because they were schooled in naturalistic philosophy.
Oh,
That was their guiding principle, and they were looking for a way to weld, what are we learning in science classes and everything else, and here we have the Bible. And so they came up with gap theory, they came up with day age theory, we now have progressive creation and theistic evolution. There's all these different ways of trying to get the naturalism into the Bible, but it doesn't work. Because specifically when you read the first page of the Bible, the days of creation, it's as if when God set up that order of events, he did it to thwart naturalistic explanations. Because you can't have plants on day 3 millions of years before you have the sun on day 4. You can't have birds and bats, the flying things, on day 5 before you have land animals on day 6. Because evolution says those things evolved from land animals.
yeah.
But God put the flying things before the land things. So, I mean, I struggle with this. I try to add evolution and millions of years and deep time to that passage every way you can imagine. It took me years bashing my head against a brick wall, knowing it wasn't going to move.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you want to write in Hebrew 6 consecutive days, you'd write it like Genesis 1 reads. And that's the problem. And that's why theologians argue about this and people struggle with this.
So it seems like old Earth is not possible.
I know most theologians disagree with me, and I'm fine with that. But the tenor of the text really does read like the universe was created in 6 consecutive days. When you add up the time frame, it's only a few thousand years ago.
And we'll get into the time frame.
Yes,
in
we're
a
going to get into
second.
the time frame. But you have to decide if there's a God, right? Naturalism isn't true. But you have to decide where God acts. Did he start off the Big Bang billions of years ago and let go? Did he maybe do a Big Bang and then create the solar system and the planet and then maybe put bacteria on it and let evolution happen? Or did he do that and then millions of years later created trilobites, and millions of years later created dinosaurs, and millions of years later created Homo sapiens? Or did he just create it? That's the hard choice. That's what Christian has to struggle with and fight with. And honestly, if we choose to read the Bible as it kind of reads, it's embarrassing because the world laughs at us.
Yeah.
But if we believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that's laughable. If we believe he didn't actually have a father, human father, that's ridiculous. If Jesus said, "Oh, I'm going to come back from the dead in 3 days," and then he did, to believe that means you're a kook.
Yeah.
So we already kooks.
You take the whole thing.
Yeah, might as well take the whole thing. They're going to laugh at us. They don't respect compromise.
The
Right?
Christians?
No, the non-Christians.
Oh.
We can compromise. It doesn't win us any favors.
Yeah.
So anyway, just saying, it is a struggle.
Yeah, I mean, you're just like, the logic about this is so amazing because you're right. Like, if we're going to say, like, yes, he did die and he did raise on the 3rd day, like, then you got to take Genesis for what it is. There's no reason. Because I did have, Dr. Ross on, and he, has that epoch, that old Earth, each one of those days represents millions of years. And, listening to him, you can justify, okay, cool. I can still believe in my science class and still go to church on Sunday. But
But
what
I
you're also saying right now is
but I
right.
still believe in my science class. It's
You
just
do.
when I learn the science, however, I have to split between what I can know and a historical model of something that might have happened in the past. Like, I know the
Mm-hmm.
boiling point of water.
Mm-hmm.
I know the force of gravity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that some stumpy-legged fish crawled out of an ocean 500 million years ago on his way to evolve into people.
Mm-hmm.
Those are very different realms of knowledge. It's called operational versus historical science. We're not arguing over the operational, what we can know,
Mm-hmm.
test, experiment with today. We're arguing over what happened in the past and no one was there to see it. And history only happens once. It's not
Yeah.
repeatable. It's not testable. It's not operational.
Interesting. So you like, let's say you have a child. I don't know if you do or not, but your child goes to, oh, four children. When your children went to science class and they came back, how did you really push your, like, what you know about what you do know operationally and what you do know about the Bible, what you are led to believe, into what they're learning at school? Did you tell them they have to take it or leave it, or were there like spaces within their science lessons that you could say, this is what we don't know, but we do from a belief standpoint of the Bible, this is what we do believe?
Yeah, pretty much like that.
Got it.
I'm not a dogmatic person. I understand I try to understand anyway, where people land in life, what they believe and why they believe it. And I know that there's a tension. It's another important thing. When God saves a person, he doesn't tell them all the answers. He basically puts them on a conveyor belt, say, I see you at the end, figure it out. And we spend the rest of our lives studying, learning, reinterpreting, hopefully getting more biblical, hopefully drawing closer to Christ, but we change, our ideas grow. It, it's not like Eureka, I know all doctrine. It's not the way
For
it
sure.
works. And
No,
so
of course not. That's why we bring on scholars like you who have studied it for years to give it to us in a nice 60-minute segment.
this might be a 3-day conversation, but we'll try to do it in 60 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to skip ahead and let's just jump into the timeline. So, how
Okay.
would you reconcile what that timeline would be? Because, like, old Earth would be billions of years old. They somehow fit in, the days of creation with the dinosaurs, with evolution. But young Earth is saying this happened in 7 days. And
Yep.
then from there, history began. But
Yep.
for me, again, like, this is where then history class comes into play. Of like, well, there was, everybody in Asia developing for so many years. You have these different dynasties, and then you have people emigrating, all over Africa, and then you have But then there's the Tower of Babel. Like, I do not know where it overlaps, and this has been always a huge sticking point for me. Of like, where did the Huns and
Yeah.
all like these things that, and like the Greek mythology, it just seems like that operates on a different universe compared to what we see in the Bible.
Okay. You want to go forward in time or backward in time?
Let's start at the beginning.
Okay. So if let's build a chronology of world history, and then from that chronology, the rest of the conversation we can reference back to that.
Okay,
So
perfect.
we need a basic framework of understanding and basic time spans, not super detailed, but let's just, God creates the universe in 6 consecutive days, rests on the 7th day. How long ago was that? Well, if you're going to figure it out biblically, the only time statements we have are the lifespans of Adam, Seth, and their descendants up to Noah. And so Adam lived 130 years and Seth was born. Okay, 130 years, plus or minus probably 6 months. So that's not an exact time statement. Seth is not born on Adam's birthday.
Got it.
And then Arphahad, and later on we have Eber, and then we have Nahor. Well, I could probably cite all the names, but I probably will miss some, so I'm not going to try. We have
Got it.
10 generations between Adam and Noah. And if you add up all those times, it's about 1,649 years between Adam and Noah's flood, when Noah was 600 years old.
It's like 1,600 years until Noah.
Yeah.
Why are we stopping at Noah? Is that because it's just wipes clean, starts over?
Because it's a nice breaking point, and because Genesis chapter 5 stops with Noah. It's a genealogy of Adam to Noah, and that's it. That's the first
Okay.
big bite of chronology we have in the Bible.
And within those 1600 years, we still get the Tower of Babel.
Nope.
And that,
That's
no?
that's after.
Okay.
Okay.
So glad you're here. Okay. So 1650 years to get to Noah.
Yeah, plus or minus a little bit, because plus we don't even know what calendar Adam used. Did Adam understand that the year is 365.25 days long? I bet it took him a while to figure that out. In fact, I'm guessing the first calendar was lunar.
I want to take a moment to highlight the platform that's revolutionizing the way that people learn about the Word of God: school. When I first started this podcast, my goal was very simple. I wanted to equip people with clear, accessible, biblical understanding through scholars. But I quickly realized that podcasting alone wasn't enough. I wanted to create a space where people could actually connect and learn and dive deeper beyond just listening. That's when I found School. School is the most user-friendly platform I've ever come across. It's built by Sam Ovens with insights from business minds like Alex Hermosi. School combines the best of online education, coaching, and community in one place. It's intuitive, powerful, and it connects you to a global network of learners and teachers. That's why I launched Biblically Heard, a place where you can chat with scholars, take courses from beginner to expert level, and even connect with me directly. So if you're looking to build a coaching business or launch an online course or create an engaged community, School beats out every other tool. It combines the best of Patreon-style tiered services and Telegram-style community feeds. It's a seamless scheduling tool with integrations with Zapier, Zoom, and even Google Calendar. If this sounds like the right platform for you, please use my affiliate link in the show notes below to get started. It won't cost you anything extra, and it keeps this channel going. Now, back to the show. Yeah.
Because who cares what a year is? The only reason you need to know...
How does that change things?
Well, if, let's say, the original count was in months and someone later on converted it into years...
Oh.
Yeah, there's going to be a rounding error.
Yeah.
It's not an error, it's not a mistake, but there's a rounding issue. Or what if, like the Sumerians, they like the number 12 and 60? What if Adam was counting in groups of 60 months? Which is which is approximately 5 years. And if you converted groups of 60 months into 5 years, all your ages would end in 0 or 5. Just like all the ages in Genesis 5 end in a 0 or 5.
Oh boy.
So it's not, the numbers are odd. The numbers are not random. There's something about these numbers that we have to deal with. And there's something mathematical happening, and I think it's a calendar convention.
Okay. So if we go from the 365 to the calendar that's grouped by 5 years,
Yep.
How does that 1600 year span affect?
It doesn't. It's just
it stays the same.
It's just most of the ages are rounded off to 0 or 5.
Got it.
But if I'm 510 years old, do I really care if I'm 511?
Got it.
512, okay. 500. Oh, now 515. Okay, whatever. They might have been counting in fives because it didn't matter.
It does. Okay.
There's possibilities.
My question was like, does that 1600 now become like 20,000 or like 500 now? Okay.
Well, interestingly, the Sumerian king list, it's not a genealogy. It's just a list of people who reigned. We don't even know who's father and son or not. But they would reign for like 64,000 years, 20,000 years. Their numbers are crazy. I had this hypothesis that I'm working on right now. I'm working with one of our other speakers to develop a new paper, mathematically examine these numbers. I think the Babylonians probably did a mathematical mistake. Like they read months and assumed that was years.
Got it.
And so instead of groups of 60 months, they say, oh, that's 60 years. All of a sudden, if you take the Babylonian numbers and divide by 60, you're very close to the biblical numbers.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's weird.
Okay, let's stay with the Bible and then let's switch into like the secular timeline that we know. Because I feel like there are like these giant gaps of like how old the Egyptians are and like, all the Chinese dynasties that like it's hard to fit those into what the biblical timeline is.
But specifically for the Chinese dynasties, the earliest dynasties, this mythical period of 5 rulers that's very long. It's not real history.
What do you mean?
It's not solid like, Emperor Chao reigned from here to here and he had 32 years and his son became this. It's a very different flavor when you read those accounts. It's the mystical period.
About to say, it sounds like a mythology of just like this was the time of our forefathers and we don't
Yes.
have hard dates.
Yes.
Like they existed, they laid the groundwork for what we know today.
Yes, but the
We're not
first
focusing.
Chinese dynasty itself was founded a few decades after the Tower of Babel. If we just take their dates and our dates and line them up, they fit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's get back to that with the secular timeline. So now we're at Noah's Ark.
We're at
Noah's
Noah.
flood.
So we don't have
Yeah.
any human history as we know it has not yet happened. This is the antediluvian, before the flood, the antediluvian era. Noah is 600 years old when the flood starts. They're on the ark for about a year. And then in Genesis 11, we have a list of Noah's son Shem and his son Arphaxad going through Eber and through Terah all the way to Abraham. So we have another 10 generations. This is when we see the lifespans drop really rapidly, but very biologically also. It's a beautiful decay curve when you plot the ages of the patriarchs. It's weird. I've run scientific experiments where I expected a decay curve and got worse results than we see in Genesis 11.
What is causing that decay? Is that because all the moisture that was keeping them so young and supple is now from the clouds and it fell?
Not nobody at CMI believes in the vapor canopy. That was a cool idea
that's
back
TikTok University for me.
Okay,
so that's why I asked.
Well, back in the 60s, that was Henry Morris and John Whitcomb in their book, The Genesis Flood, which I've got on my bookshelf back here. They suggested the waters above were a vapor canopy that shielded the earth, but we would all die if there was water vapor in the upper atmosphere. It would be a blanket. There would be so much heat. Lead would melt in your hand. That's how much heat would be trapped. You can't have upper atmosphere water. You have to radiate all the heat to outer space, or we die quickly. In fact, think of how hot the sun is, right? How much energy the sun is putting into the earth in the daytime. All that energy has to be radiated back into space at night.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's a lot of heat.
That is a lot of heat. So we'd be like boiling if there was like a vapor. Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So then what's causing all of these ages to drop off?
I suspect multiple things. One is a change in diet. We know that vegetarians live longer than meat eaters. Now, I eat meat. I like meat, but it is true that a vegetarian lifestyle is healthier than eating meat.
Got it.
For a million reasons, but we also have a problem of inbreeding. Noah's
before Noah or after?
Well, maybe before. We don't know
but
Noah's family
after.
line, but Shem, Ham, and Japheth are brothers. They're the founders of the whole human race. Their 3 wives, they could have been sisters.
Yeah.
They could have been pulled from a family group. They actually could have been daughters of Noah, as in the 3 brothers married 3 sisters. That's creepy, but it's possible. But
wouldn't that have been the same exact thing with Adam?
Yes, except Adam wouldn't have had any mutations. If God created Adam, God didn't create Adam with bad stuff in his body. It was over thousands of years mutations build up. Today, it's really bad idea to marry your cousin. In Adam's day, that would have been 0 problem. In Noah's day, there would have been probably less of a problem, but look what happens. The lifespans.
1,600 years of mutations.
Yeah. Plus the inbreeding. Plus, we know that the Earth's magnetic field, I said we know, I shouldn't say it. There is strong scientific indication to tell us that the Earth's magnetic field has flipped its axis many times.
Okay.
We see that in a striping pattern from the mid-ocean ridge in the Atlantic. As you go outwards, you see different magnetic fields in the Earth's rock. So it really does look like the magnetic field is flipped. That had to happen during Noah's flood. But every time the Earth's magnetic field collapses and reforms in the other direction, we lose the shielding of the magnetic field and we get irradiated by cosmic rays from outer space.
What? Oh my God. gosh.
Yeah.
How often does this happen?
Well, in the evolutionary model, once every 10 or 20 or 30,000 years, whatever. In a biblical model, it would have to go wong, 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 wong. Using probably
Like,
not with that sound, but it would have happened multiple times during the flood year.
it happens throughout the year. Like
No, it doesn't. It doesn't happen now. Well, at least it hasn't happened in the historical period since we started measuring it.
Got it.
But the magnetic, I remember as a kid in Boy Scouts in New York, on Long Island, learning how to orient with a compass. And we're looking at the maps, and magnetic north was due north of us. So we didn't have to adjust our compass readings. But today, magnetic north has galloped across the Arctic Ocean, is approaching Russia. They're about to steal our magnetic north. So it was like real stable for a couple hundred years, and all of a sudden it's moving 1,000 miles in the last 5 years.
So that just kind of happens over time, it sounds like? Okay.
We haven't been measuring it long enough to know.
Got it.
But from the striping patterns, it has reversed multiple times. And in a biblical perspective, that has to happen during the flood year. So Noah and his children and his wife are getting irradiated several times every time the magnetic field collapses and reforms.
Got it.
And now they're inbreeding. All the cousins there's no one else to marry except your brother, your sister, or your cousin.
Right.
In that first generation. That's generally bad news for a population.
Got it.
Okay.
I want to take a minute and say thank you to the recording service that has made this podcast possible, Riverside. When I started my podcast, I had literally no idea what I was doing, and I just wanted a single way to record, edit, and share content without wasting time on different platforms. Then, a friend suggested Riverside to me, and I'll tell you what, it was literally an answer to prayer. With just one login, I can record my interviews with scholars, clip interview moments into Reels for Instagram and TikTok, and post directly onto my RSS feed and Spotify, all without the extra downloads, platforms, all of it. So for the curious and confused people like me, the best part is that the crew at Riverside actually listens to their users when they need help. I wanted an editing preset to save time on creating reel templates, and they listened. They literally implemented a new feature. And since using Riverside, my social clips have reached over 1 million people each month. And I haven't even unlocked all the features yet. Live streaming is going to be next. So if you're considering starting a podcast, or you just need to edit at a pro level for content or interviews, I cannot recommend Riverside enough. If this is helpful for you, I ask that you click the affiliate link I provided in the show notes description. It costs nothing extra to you, and it gives a small kickback to me, which helps the channel stay alive. Thank you so much. Now back to the show. Yeah, I guess, I mean, you modernize it so well in these ancient terms that you think that like this is more of a modern issue of inbreeding, just because like all we know is today. We don't think about it really in the past, but historically speaking, that would still cause issues then, as it would still cause issues today. Again, like it's not new news, but it is like that does make sense. And why it wasn't an issue for Adam and Eve, like that makes a lot of sense. I think that I can logically follow that.
We do see issues though in Abraham's time. He married his half-sister, Sarah. They couldn't get pregnant. It took a miraculous intervention of God for her to have a child.
Oh, that's a really good point.
When Esau is born, he's hairy all over. He probably had the hypertrichosis gene or the Wolfman gene. He was noticeably hairy. He's covered in hair. That's what the Bible says.
Oh
like,
my gosh.
Yeah, like, wow, what is that? And
because it's not biblically saying that there's something wrong with him.
Yeah.
Okay, what were you going to say about Leah?
Leah had weak eyes. I don't know what that means. It might have been she's not good looking, or maybe it's her eyes have a problem. But that's right there in the same context.
Yeah, I mean, when you say it like that, because like it's not like the Bible's like, and she had an issue with this. She had an issue with this. I mean, I feel like you only see that with the bleeding woman in the New Testament, but biblically, you're like, oh, that's just God using all types of people.
It's an idiom. We don't know what the idiom means. She had weak eyes. Was she half blind? Was she blind? Or was she ugly? I don't know.
Yeah, like a lazy eye, like whatever it could have been. Like, wow, that is phenomenal.
And I'm suggesting,
okay.
All right, I'm just suggesting that might be a genetic thing.
It makes sense.
Like
It's
later
a
on in Dave, when Dave was an older person, all the so-called sons of the giant, which should be Goliath, are getting killed off one by one in battle, and one of them had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. He had polydactyly, a common sign of inbreeding.
Oh my gosh, this is so cool that we're talking.
Okay.
This is so cool. Okay. So we're at Noah. There's inbreeding. The ages are dropping off.
Okay.
How do we reconciliate with that with kind of the rest of the timelines?
Well, if you add up all the time between Shem and Terah, Abraham's father, you get another several thousand years. And then by the time you get to Abraham, we're about 2000 BC. So all the other ancient history we talk about has to be fit into about a 500-year window.
All the other history we talk about, like in the rest of the world,
Yeah,
has to take place within the 500 years of Noah to Abraham?
yeah, pretty much. Maybe 1,000 years.
What happens once Abraham? Like, does everything else just kind of start revolving around Abraham?
No. I'm just saying that's the about the time frame of Abraham is about 500 years after the flood, and he's probably, I'm going to call him Chalcolithic, the Copper Age.
Got it.
That the evolutionists would put way before him. But I'm looking at the technologies the Bible's describing in the Bible. It's pretty primitive technologies. Later on, Solomon is building these giant bronze bulls and this giant bowl of bronze. And, well, that's the Iron Age, actually. He's not even in the Bronze Age anymore.
So once we get to Abraham, where are we at when it's like the Egyptians, with like the Romans, with the Greeks, what's going on in Africa, what's going on in China? Like, what's going on?
Lots of things all over the world. But, I mean, it's funny because we talk about the Dark Ages, right? That is a terrible phrase. That was invented by the Enlightenment philosophers to describe everyone that came before them.
Oh,
well, aren't you special? I'm enlightened. My grandfather was in the Dark Ages. I mean, those people who invented universities and writing and eyeglasses and all the things you scholarly people need to be a scholar, and, they're just dumb? Why? Okay. So there was no Dark Ages. We call that the medieval period today. But that's
like 500 years ago.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago at all. The real Dark Ages was in the years after the flood, as people spread out on the earth before civilizations were invented, before writing came about. For most of the earth, we have pretty much no records, actually, for the early settlement periods. All we have is, pots and bones and graves. We don't have any historical records. We don't
That's
have.
why the Dead Sea Scrolls were such a fascinating find.
Yes, but those are another 2,000 years later after Abraham.
Oh my gosh!
There's very little writing, and we can't trust a lot of the writing. Like, we know that some of the ancient kings stole an event that happened in their grandfather's time, and they claimed it was them and put it on a giant monument. And here's me smiting my foes in this battle, dude. It wasn't you. You're lying. And we know, like, for Egyptian history, the most important person in this is a guy named Manetho, who was a Ptolemaic scholar. He post-dated Alexander the Great. So his general Ptolemy, who took over Egypt, wanted to legitimize his reign as a descendant of the pharaoh. So he hires this guy to basically manipulate the record. And he chains all these pharaohs together, all these different dynasties, many of which were contemporaneous.
What does that mean?
That happened at the same time, because Egypt wasn't always unified. There's times when Egypt was broken up into little petty kingdoms, but he chains them together end to end, and that artificially extends Egyptian history.
And why did they want to do that? Just to make the reign seem super long and powerful? Like, what's the move there?
His competitor was Berosus, who was working for the Seleucids in Mesopotamia. The other Seleucus was one of Alexander's other generals, and they had the Mesopotamian records, but put their kingdom at tens of thousands of years old because of those long king reigns. And so Ptolemy's
Because
like,
they
no,
would
no,
stack them right after each other.
yeah. So Ptolemy's like, no, we have the superior kingdom. We're older. And so these two, and it's politics.
Mm.
A lot of ancient history is politics. When you see a list of kings on a wall at Karnak in Egypt, you can't trust it, because once you realize they left off King Tut, they left off his father Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh, they left off Queen Hatshepsut. It's like, why did they leave these people? Because they didn't like them. So it's not
But
real.
we know about those people. Like,
Yeah,
those
we
are probably
do. That's right.
the
We
most
do.
notable ones.
Yes, but they didn't want us to know about them
Why?
because it wasn't politically convenient to have a pharaoh who believed in only one god.
Mm.
Akhenaten
Mm.
can't have that. That questions the entire pharaonic system.
Oh my gosh.
So chisel his name off the wall, destroy his city, ignore that guy ever lived. And so how do we trust the rest?
And so you're saying, based off what you've mentioned about like Chinese dynasties, it's kind of happening all over, that when we independently study global history in school or at university, it's taking what we know, which was it was recorded chronologically one after another. But if we look at it within context of what were the motives within that, if your motive is to seem all powerful, you're going to make it seem larger. You're going to exclude that one candidate that you maybe didn't like. If you lived at the time, it made sense. And realistically, it was probably like 500 years of history being built. But we look back and we're like, well, if each person was living to this age, then it must have been 10,000 years of reigning.
Yeah. And it's funny because the archaeologists know this problem and they're stuck. And the scientists know the problem, say, oh, we'll come into the rescue. We will put scientific dates on these artifacts. But the most common one they use is carbon dating. And carbon dating works great up till the time of Christ. But then when you get to about 500 BC, you're in the middle of what's called the Hallstatt disaster, named after a place in Austria, Hallstatt, where they've carbon dated all these layers, and hundreds of years of dates give you the same date. And we don't know what happened. Something, either the Earth's magnetic field weakened, or the sun was very active, or maybe a supernova blew up, or something happened where you've got centuries where you see it in the calibration curve. The calibration curve goes down, 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 goes flat, and then goes down again. Actually wiggles a little bit and then goes down again. The flat spot on the calibration curve. We know this.
So they're looking at layers of soil. Like, I'm just trying to picture this.
Something like that, yes.
And they get to a point where, like, okay, this is the last 50 years. This was, 100 years ago. This was 200. And then you get to a very large block. How do we know that that represents hundreds of years?
Because we could do it in other places in the world also.
Okay, so like that region, 500 miles away is representing the hundreds of years. But right here, we're not really getting a clear read.
Yeah. So, and this is a time frame of King David, the divided monarchy, the Persian Empire, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the Assyrian Empire. I mean, these are really important things that you can't use carbon dating for. But it still works. We have this calibration curve, and you say, okay, my date is here. That means I'm within this span. Okay. But by the time you get to something like Jericho, about 1500 BC, the carbon date puts it 150 to 200 years older than the destruction layer. We know the Israelites destroyed Jericho. I mean, everything in Jericho screams the Israelite story. The city that had a double wall that fell outwards, except in one place, that would have been Rahab's house. The city was not plundered afterwards, which is bizarre. It was deliberately burned. All the stuff is in the ground, and no one lived there for 500 years. That is the biblical story. But the carbon date puts the destruction prior to when Joshua was there.
Oh.
But so which was right, the carbon date or historical date?
Oh, boy.
Sir Leonard Woolley, did he get knighted? I don't know. Leonard Woolley invented carbon dating during World War II. And he used Egyptian sarcophaguses to validate his technique. And it says 1940s. He even said, look at that. There's a systematic bias. The older my sample is, the art of it starts diverging from how old I think it is. My date says it's older. And it gets worse and worse and worse the farther back in time I go.
Because the data like gets worse? Like, why would it do that?
I honestly, I think it's because during the flood, we had lots of volcanism. Volcanoes are very low in carbon-14. We had lots of limestone formation. We completely turned over the carbon budget, if you would, of the Earth and restarted. And then carbon-14 started building up in the atmosphere, plus the Earth's magnetic field has been weakening, which slows down the protective basically the Earth's magnetic field protects us from cosmic rays, but cosmic rays are the things that make carbon-14 in the atmosphere.
So it's just overall weakened over time, so
Yeah.
the reading is just less accurate.
Not necessarily less accurate. It's just that if you go back in time, assuming the Earth's magnetic field was stronger, there would have been less carbon-14 in the atmosphere. Therefore, anything you date will have less carbon-14 than it should based on the modern amount. And so as you go closer to the flood, you get inflation of the carbon dates. I explain that in my article on creation.com, how carbon dating works.
Okay.
Very simple article. It's a
I'll
fun
link
read.
it
It's a
in the
long
show
article
notes.
because it was fun to explain, using historical anecdotes, like when they found King Richard the Third buried under a parking lot in England. He was the last of the Plantagenets, right? The end of the War of the Roses. And he was buried after he died and was butchered in this battle. They buried him right next to the altar in a church. And the closer to the altar you are, the more rich you are. That's how it worked in the medieval world. But they buried him, but this church no longer exists. This abbey became a parking lot and a building. And they figured out where he was. They dug him up and said, "That's Richard III." He even had a horrible case of scoliosis. Shakespeare said he had a bent back.
Oh.
Boom. So that's him. They carbon dated him, and the carbon date was wrong.
Oh.
And they said, "Oh, wait a minute. Oh, hold on. No, he was the king. He didn't eat chickpeas all day long like the peasants. He would have eaten a lot of beef. But plants have more carbon-14 than meat does."
You take into account so much.
Well, they had to do that and once they readjusted the model for his diet, he was spot on as far as the data is concerned.
So we can't take this blanket carbon dating approach to history. Nope. There's way too many factors at play.
Yep. There's another example. There's been a big debate for years. Did syphilis come to us from the Native American, come to Europe from the Native Americans, or did the horrible Europeans give the Native Americans syphilis? Mm-hmm. And well, syphilis eats your bones. If you die of syphilis, you can see the skeleton said, that person died of syphilis. It's horrible. Well, they found some skeletons in Portugal, and they died of syphilis. It was the earliest ones they ever found. So they said, oh, okay, let's carbon date them. And they carbon dated prior to 1492. So syphilis was in Europe before we discovered the Americas. Except 10 years later, someone said, wait a minute, that's not right. These people lived on the coast in a fishing village, and most of their diet was shellfish and fish. And the ocean has less carbon-14 than the land.
Oh my God.
So you had to apply a different historical model to these people. And when you do that, yeah, they had less carbon-14 in their bodies because they ate a lot of oceanic produce, which means they look older than they really are. They're actually post-1492. Syphilis came to us from the Americas.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That is so interesting.
Now apply those thoughts to the biblical question, how old the earth is.
I have no idea where you'd even begin. There's just too many factors.
There are too many. Exactly. There are too many factors. So carbon dating is a wonderful science with limitations, and the further back in time you go, the less certain you can be of its accuracy. That's the issue. And so we can't use that specific test to say, oh, this Egyptian pyramid was built at this particular time. Yeah, okay, you dated the wood in that pyramid. You don't actually know how old it is.
Interesting. So it sounds like basically if I'm like taking into all the events that are happening, what we see in that biblical timeline of what's going on with the Israelites and like, kind of getting down to Jesus's birth, everything in the world is happening within that time period. It's
Yeah.
not an isolated timeline that's existing outside of a larger global timeline.
No, no, it's the entire thing rolled into a biblical time frame. Yeah. It's funny because another way to think about it, in the evolutionary model, after we became Homo sapiens in Africa, for about 300,000 years, we had a world population of about 1 million people. It's not a lot of people for an entire planet. But then 10,000, 15,000 years ago, we started developing agriculture and our population exploded. Today we have 8 billion people. But for about first 300,000 years or so, they say we're only about 1 million people. I say, okay, we can do some math here. 1 million people. The average generation time is probably, let's just call it 30 years to make it easy. So every 30 years, you have 1 million dead bodies for 300,000 years. Where are the billions of dead bodies? Where are the towns?
Decomposing, obviously.
Yeah, and they had symbolic representation. They buried their dead, and we do have some scattered remains here and there, but there should be so much evidence of human activity. It's just not there. It's as if the people never existed. So instead, let's just start with Shem, Ham, and Japheth and their 3 wives. Let's say we're 6 people. The flood was about 4,500 years ago. Can we get 8 billion people from 6 in only 4,500 years? That sounds hard, right?
Yeah.
It's not. All you have to do is double the population every 150 years.
And just like exponentially
Yeah.
compound.
Yeah. So 150 years after the flood, there's 12 people. 300 years after the flood, there's 24 people. That's ridiculous. Of course, there's more people than that. But by keeping the population growth incredibly low, you arrive at 8 billion people today with ease.
Interesting.
So the number of people in the world fits the biblical model really well. We just had to slow down population growth from war and starvation and disease to keep it so we only have 8 billion people. The numbers are on our side of the equation, and the archaeology, since there's no evidence of millions of people living in the past, it really does look biblical.
Remember when I said at the beginning of this episode, it's really hard to
Yes.
react at live time because somebody just drops a bomb on you? This is like me in real time right now. This is okay. So this is a fun game. This is what I learned at school. Where do you place it in the timeline? Is like, when did the dinosaurs happen? When did the Ice Age happen? Like, where do you place those?
Dinosaurs are pre-flood.
Pre-flood.
The fossil record itself was caused by Noah's flood.
Okay. Not an asteroid.
Well, an asteroid might hit the Earth to start off the flood, or we might have gotten hit by asteroids during the flood. I mean, you look at the moon; it's obviously been hit by something. Question is when. So I don't know, that there was no asteroids, but no, it was not. It's not just the end of the Cretaceous where the supposed asteroid killed off the dinosaurs. It's the fossil record. We have 1,600 years between Adam and the flood, where lots of things can build up, like clamshells and crinoid discs and whatever on bottoms of shallow seas, and that all gets buried. And then after all the oceanic stuff gets buried, then dinosaurs and things like that get buried. The fossil record is a record of Noah's flood. So that's when the so-called dinosaurs happened. Now, whether or not they were on Noah's Ark, whether or not they lived with man afterwards, that's a whole nother subject for another day.
Okay.
There's not zero evidence for that, but it's just a long, fun conversation.
Got it. Okay.
So that's the fossil record. The Ice Age was caused by Noah's flood.
The Ice Age was caused by Noah's flood. You mean there was a flood that froze?
Nope. The after effects of the flood are exactly what you would want to have an Ice Age. In fact, I think we got a better model for the Ice Age than the secularists do. You
Please
don't
tell me.
well, you don't cool off the Earth to get an ice age. You warm up the Earth to get an ice age. You
That
need
doesn't make any sense.
evaporation. You need heat to go into the water to evaporate the water so it can come down as snow.
Just so I'm clear,
Okay.
the flood happens, it
Yes.
freezes, and now that's where we get all these giant glaciers that then did melt.
Not quite. Not quite. Okay. Let me set it up for you. During the flood, we have lots of volcanism happening. You have continents moving. You have warm oceans, which causes evaporation. But with with what we call catastrophic plate tectonics, not slow, fast as your fingernails grow plate tectonics, but about as fast as a person can walk plate tectonics, which is what
Oh,
the science is actually telling us. The computer modeling says, yeah, once you start plate tectonics, it goes until the plates at the
like
bottom
during
of the
the
mantle.
flood, everything is floating like cereal and milk, like it is moving.
Yeah,
Okay.
moving. But when the flood stops, I mean, what drains the waters off the continents? Well, the Bible says the mountains rose. So we have mountain forming. And if you look at the Alps, the Andes, the Rockies, the Himalayas, those are all geologically very young mountain chains. And it's weird. Why did they post date the dinosaurs? They're younger than the extinction of the dinosaurs in the evolutionary model. Why did the Earth all of a sudden start building mountains? In weird places like the Rockies, the subduction zones is the edge of California. Why do the Rockies even exist? Plate tectonics does not explain where they are.
Oh my gosh.
But if you have a continental plate that gets pushed down, the first thing that's going to melt are the silicate materials. They're going to, in fact, the rock will stay there. The silicates will boil off once you start heating it up. That causes a specific type of volcano. It's called a shield volcano. Not like, the Hawaiian Islands where you have lava bubbling up. The shield volcano is explosive and is dust, like Mount St. Helens, which blew up in 1980. And poof, you have all this dust exploding into the air as these mountains are forming. Warm oceans, dust in the air reflects the sunlight. You have warm oceans and cold continents. The oceans are evaporating, coming down as rain, and far north and far south and high elevation coming down as snow. And so you get snow building up for several centuries. And then it stops. And it starts melting. So the sea levels drop, in meters, about 300 feet. So about 100 meters below present. Actually, they drop about 400 feet. And when they melt, they come back up again. So the current sea level is about 80 feet lower than it was right after the flood.
And that ice age is just from that snow for centuries.
Yeah. The snow building up as ice is draining the waters down, and it's building up. Siberia, think of Siberia, right? We had these pictures of woolly mammoths in Siberia during the Ice Age. You think of a woolly mammoth, you've had that image in your head, right? Woolly mammoths can't live in Siberia today. It's too cold.
So where would they be?
They lived when it was warmer.
Oh my gosh.
Siberia
and it was
wasn't
warmer because of the silica melting.
Siberia wasn't glaciated during the Ice Age.
Oh.
I just read a paper. In fact, I did a video on my Biblical Genetics channel. There's an island 100 miles off the coast of Siberia in the Arctic Ocean, and it's covered in elephant bones. Elephants being woolly mammoths. And geneticists are sequencing DNA out of these tusks and bones and building a family tree of these elephants that lived on this island in the Arctic Ocean.
Oh my god.
Elephants can't live there today. There's not enough food on this because it was warmer during the Ice Age than it is today.
When it was warmer during the Ice Age than it is today, what do you mean by warmer? So if it was elephants could live in what is now modern day Siberia, how warm was it in Siberia then?
Okay, I don't exactly know, but from the grasses, sedges, and there's fruit trees in Siberia during this time. There's different plants living there. And sure, it might be 6 months of darkness once you get far enough north, but that also means a 6 months growing cycle. So you get a lot of plants growing, and the elephants are eating it in the dark during the winter, if they're above the Arctic Circle. But that's the recipe. We have warm oceans, lots of dust that creates an ice age. But the ice isn't universal. Just because there's an ice age doesn't mean the Earth is frozen. I mean, there's still tropical rainforests. There's still coral reefs.
Yeah.
There's still temperate grasslands. It's just the polar regions kind of encroach on the others, and the temperate regions go south. But there's still a warm belt at the equator that doesn't change much at all.
Got it. Okay.
Creation.com, Ice Age. In fact, our Creation Answers book, we have a whole chapter on the Ice Age. In fact, we just came out with a brand new book that CMI just produced. I haven't even seen it yet. Oh, I saw a copy of it, but I haven't seen it on our shelves yet. It's a single ice age caused by Noah's flood.
Oh my gosh. I'm trying to think of other events that I want to place, but I feel like those are my two big ones. Do you get common questions that you like to clarify?
Yeah, actually, it's the pyramids.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, well, if you take the secular date for the pyramids, they predate Noah's flood.
Okay.
They can't. They're
Why?
built because they're built out of flood-derived limestones. Plus, they couldn't survive Noah's flood. You got a bunch of blocks that are just stacked up. You think of the surface area of one side of a pyramid. Just stacked blocks. And the limestone's not very heavy. It's only 2.5 times heavier than water. So if you submerge it, now the buoyancy of the water means only 1.5 times heavier than water. It's not very heavy. And then even a 1 mile an hour current. Could you imagine that the force, the pressure against that face? Just a little bit of pressure on that huge surface area. The rocks are going to tumble over.
Wow.
So they can't survive the flood. And they're made of flood-deposited limestone, so therefore they didn't survive the flood.
Because they came from after the flood.
Because after the flood. But that means that we have to condense Egyptian history a lot.
Yeah.
But it's the earlier stuff we have to condense, not the later stuff.
Oh.
Because the later on you get, the more likely you have the pharaoh's mummy. You know his reign length. You know who his son is. You know, the history is pretty good. Excuse me. At the later stuff. But when you get to there are several intermediate periods where Egyptian history just collapses. It's chaotic. And those might be collapsible. But then you get like the pre-dynastic period and the Old Kingdom. Yeah, we have lists of pharaohs and things, but it's so fragmentary. It's not settled history. And if there's ever times when you have, two different dynasties, one in northern Egypt and one in southern Egypt, and even in the middle of Egypt, if we don't know they're contemporaneous, we're going to link them one after the other and artificially expand the timeline.
Ah, I see. So when do you think based on Noah's flood, how many years after did that community start becoming what is known as Egypt?
It would have happened pretty quickly.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to say 500 years after the flood. So Abrahamic time, sort of. That's probably when the pyramids of Giza were being built. Probably.
Oh, okay.
But not that Abraham ever saw the pyramids.
Right.
Because they're not close to the border with Israel.
Got it.
And they're really far away. But that's about the time frame.
So the pharaoh that Moses was interacting with was a very different.
If you just take that, we're working right now on a 7-part video series on biblical Egypt. In fact, I'm going back to Egypt in 2.5 weeks.
Good for you.
I can't wait. I love Egypt.
It's going to be amazing.
But if you just take the Egyptian timeline, straight up timeline, and the biblical timeline, no modifications, you say, okay, well, the Israelites were in Egypt. When? Well, that puts them in the second intermediate period. When Egypt is not controlled by the Egyptians. They're controlled by a group of people from Asia called the Hyksos. They're actually a Semitic people, just like the Israelites are Semitic people. They're controlling Egypt. And then all of a sudden you realize there's clues in the text, like when Joseph tells his dad, hey, tell Pharaoh that you're a shepherd because shepherds are an abomination to the Egyptians. What? Why would I want to tell the Pharaoh that he should hate me? That makes no sense unless the Pharaoh's not an Egyptian. The Hyksos understood Semitic farming practices and things. He basically said, tell the Pharaoh that you're one of him. You're not Egyptian. Oh. You're like him. You speak a similar language, and you're farmers and herdsmen.
So that wasn't to make him hate him. That's to make him like him.
Yeah. And so Pharaoh gives him the best of the land. He actually puts the Israelites on the eastern edge of the border as a buffer state between the raiders from the east and the Egyptians. So now he's protected.
What? Oh my gosh, this is the context I've been looking for.
Creation.com, just search for Egypt, multiple articles. We've been writing about this for years now. It's just a fun project we've had, and we worked really hard. So
that Pharaoh is not the pharaohs that we see post-flood?
Oh, no, he's post-flood, yes. What do you mean?
I mean, so the Pharaoh that Moses and...
Okay, hold on. Egyptian history, we have the second intermediate period, which Joseph seems to fit in. But then a Pharaoh arises who does not know Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
That is, from the timeline, that would be the rise of the new kingdom, where Amhos conquers the Hyksos.
Okay, so
and now we have the new. This is like the Valley of the Kings, the King Tut, that kind of stuff. We're not building pyramids anymore. We're building Valley of the Kings now in the new kingdom.
Got it.
So we have a different type of Egyptian culture now, and they don't like the Israelites. They don't like the Hebrews at all.
Got it.
And so we have a man named Moses, who is contemporary with like Amhos and Kamhos and Tutmosis, the first, second, and third. I mean, all these Oses in these words, and here we have Moses, and it's like that's the same name. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but he's contemporaneous with Hatshepsut.
Oh.
As if she was the princess that Moses' mother interacted with.
Oh my gosh. His real mother or the mother that adopted?
Well, no. Hatshepsut, we don't know if this is the Egyptian princess, but the timeline is right there. You have this Queen Hatshepsut, and it's the same timeline, and she would have been around, and here's Moses, who would have been around, and if she was the princess that adopted Moses, we got a problem, because Hatshepsut's husband died. And now, who's going to be the pharaoh? The little boy? Or Queen Hatshepsut, who sets herself up like a pharaoh? But then there's Moses, who's adopted. He can't be the pharaoh. This is a massive dynastic problem. So eventually, Moses is run out of the country. He's away for 40 years. When he comes back, let my people go. That's the whole story. In the 10th plague, all the firstborn children died. That's not firstborn babies. That's all the firstborn, period. That means adult firstborn men would have also have died. Pharaoh didn't die.
Oh boy.
He wasn't firstborn.
Oh boy.
His son.
Are you saying that Pharaoh then was Hatshepsut's brother or son?
Stepson.
Got it.
So she's not. He's from memory here. He is the son of her husband through another woman.
Oh. Okay.
But he's not. He can't be the firstborn if he's not going to die in the plague. But the Bible says that the son of Pharaoh died in the plague. The son of Pharaoh. So the next Pharaoh can also be not firstborn.
I feel like you're just like giving me such historical tea right now. Like this is so juicy.
There's one time period in Egyptian history where there's two pharaohs in a row that aren't firstborn.
When?
Amenhotep II and his son. And it exactly fits the biblical time frame.
Oh my gosh. And Hatshepsut married one of them?
She's already dead.
Okay.
So you can't know that is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Right? You can't know it. but all the stuff links up. The time frame, it just links, and there's thing after thing after thing that just leaps out at you from the passages. Even like the Bible says that Joseph, so we're going back a couple hundred years here, Joseph rode in a chariot. Chariots did not exist in the Old Kingdom. The Hyksos brought in the chariot. Oh yeah, that puts Joseph in Hyksos time period again. There's so many, there's dozens of correlations between the two stories.
And just so I'm clear, I'm sure you've said this, but
okay.
the Hyksom and the Old Kingdom, where's the separation there?
The Old Kingdom ends, and then you have the Middle Kingdom. So you have the Old King. Sorry, let's go from the beginning. Pre-dynastic period. Then you have the Old Kingdom, when then Egypt is united. Then you have an intermediate period of chaos. Everything falls apart. Then you have the Middle Kingdom, which is archaeologically very poorly attested to. Lots of questions about Middle Kingdom. Then you have the second intermediate period. That's the Hyksos. And then you have a reuniting of Egypt in the most glorious time. Ramses II is in there, and Hatshepsut and King Tut. That's all New Kingdom stuff.
And where were the Hyksoms?
In this, right before the New Kingdom, Hyksos. And so the Pharaoh that arose that did not know Joseph is quite possibly the first Pharaoh of the New Kingdom.
Oh, okay. That makes way more sense.
And the heretic Pharaoh who only believed in one God would have been the grandson of the Exodus Pharaoh.
Oh.
A young boy who knew that all the gods of Egypt were destroyed by the God of the Israelites. And so he changes the religion.
Oh.
That's the time frame.
And then Cleopatra would be
way
younger.
Way later.
Way later.
Yeah. Cleopatra VII is the last of the Ptolemaic pharaohs. Oh. She's like, 30 BC or something like that. We're talking 1500 BC.
Okay.
Because the Exodus would have been 1446 BC.
So the timeline, because I've seen Egyptian history is so long. There was historians within to study ancient Egyptian. But how long is that from the early kingdom to Cleopatra-esque timeline? Is that 1,000 years then?
More.
Okay, it's 1,500 years.
Maybe 2,000.
Okay.
Yeah, 1,500. Yeah, ish. Well, no, it's the Exodus is about 1,500 BC. So if Abraham lived about 2000 BC, Moses lived about 1500 BC, King David lived about 1000 BC.
Whoa, those are big anchor points.
That's nice anchor points, nice round numbers, and literally King David's lifespan spanned 1000 BC.
Wow.
And if the Exodus is 1446, then Moses lived about 1500 BC. Nice round numbers that really help to put these things in our head so we can anchor it down, lay out history, and understand how all the other things fit together.
Do you have a resource on Creation Ministries of a physical, not written, but a timeline that you've drawn for all of these?
Multiple ones.
Oh, perfect.
So
perfect.
Especially in the... I have an article called The Biblical Minimum and Maximum Age of the Earth.
Okay.
Where, when, anytime you're given a number in the Bible, that's not accurate to the millisecond.
Right.
It's accurate to the year. So there's some flexibility there. And then there's questions like, Arphaxad is born 2 years after the flood. What does that mean? The second spring after the flood to 24 months after the flood, but that affects the dating of the earth.
Got it.
How long were the Israelites in Egypt? That affects literally, there's an argument, it's called the long sojourn versus the short sojourn, that affects the age of the universe by over 2 centuries. Because to know how old the earth is, part of the timeline is how long were the Israelites in Egypt.
Yes. Which is just 40 years, right? Smack in 40 years.
No, it's 40 years of wandering. The Bible says in Exodus, it was 430 years to the very day where they left. 430 years, but most scholars think it wasn't 430 years, it was 215 years.
Oh.
Because you have to ask 430 years from what?
Got
From
it.
the day they entered Egypt, or from when God made the promise to Abraham? You know, the
Right.
smoking fire pot one, when Abraham fell asleep and he
Mm-hmm.
had his dream. Well, he's like, I don't know, over 80 years old when that happened.
Mm-hmm.
So if it starts there, then they're not in Egypt for 430 years. They're in Egypt for about, I don't know, 220, 215 years.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. You're right. This might be a 3-day conversation. Would love to have you back. But I think we touched on a lot of points that I just need to like let settle and maybe just visualize a bit. So
Yeah.
I will be diving into Creation Ministries. I'll look into your page. I'll have everything linked in the show notes. But beyond working with CMI, what do you teach? Do you have speaking? Like, how do people get in contact with you or interact with you?
Uh, I I travel a lot. I'm away from home about every other weekend. So I've just recently I was in Michigan. Just last weekend I was in South Carolina. This weekend I'm going to spend a week in Colorado in the Denver area. Um, then I'm going off to Egypt, and then 2 weeks after that I'm going to a conference in Germany, and then another conference in Arizona. Then back to Arizona again, and back to Colorado again, and back to Arizona again. That's up to August. I probably missed some events in
Wow.
there.
Are these
This is
public events that people can
Yeah,
attend?
yeah.
Okay.
Basically, I'm speaking at churches mainly, some schools.
Got it.
So
Got it.
Sunday morning at a church, Sunday evening at a church, Wednesday nights, Christian schools here and there. Just
Okay.
this is my life,
That's
and
amazing. If people wanted to attend one of those, would that be on CMI?
absolutely yes. In fact,
Okay, cool.
if you sign up for our once a week newsletter, on the bottom there'll be a list of all the events specifically in your area. So
Cool.
with technology, we're able to say, okay, what's your zip code? We're about to send it to. Here's everything within like 100 miles of you,
Oh,
or something like
cool.
that. Yeah.
Are you coming to Hawaii?
Do you live in Hawaii?
I live in Honolulu. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Talk to your pastor. Let's go.
I would love that. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll talk to him,
All
and
right.
that'd be so cool if you could come out. Okay, great. I will like make sure everything's linked. So if somebody wants to get in contact or attend, I think it's always so great when people like you, or like that's how I found Dr. Ross, is like at a church talking about it. Like that is where the intersection of understanding our faith comes
Yeah.
in, and you've just brought so much clarity to the Word of God and just like making it edible and digestible
Thank you.
and enjoyable today to the modern Christian. So this
But
is what I needed.
we just started. There's so much more. It's basically ready. It's a lifetime of study. That's what's in front of you. A lifetime of enjoying learning. And even now, I've got some ideas. Every once in a while, it's like, oh, wait a minute. I hadn't thought through that before. That's contradictory. What? I'm dumb. How come I never put those pieces together? It still happens.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm going to find a way to bring you back on. And I don't even care about the schedule. We'll just chat. But this was amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Carter, for all of your time and
You're welcome.
intelligence. I'll see you soon.
All right.